I don't know.
Say it with me. I don't know.
Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. And so we observe the world, we see what happened, and then we define the thing that happened as the reason the thing happened. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. Maybe even ask them about that thing that they've created, because to them, it's immensely valuable. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We have no other choice. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
Never know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 157 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, I interview Cheri Jamison. Cheri grew up in Self-Realization Fellowship, founded by Paramahansa Yogananda. I'm sure I said that wrong. A sort of blend of Christianity and Hinduism, and went through a very painful transition out of it around 2007. She faced a rude awakening regarding her naive ambitions around SRF while taking a religious studies class in college, wherein she realized her sacred religion was not as special as she thought it was. Thus, nor was she as special as she thought she was. She went on to earn a master's in spiritual psychology in 2014. She was able to let go of feeling stuck in limbo between her loyalty issues with SRF and fully embracing what was true for her as an adult. Today, she's an ordained minister in MSIA, which is the Church of the Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, founded by John Roger. Inspired by her own deep healing work, Cheri created a 5-week program called Religion of Origin Healing, which helps others make peace with their own spiritual journey and honestly examine the tenets they may have inherited that no longer serve them. Now, as a warning, this episode is 1, without Bob. He was still on vacation when I taped it. And 2, Cheri is what some would call woo-woo. She meditates. In fact, her mother taught her how to meditate at age 2. And she's active in Unity Church in Kansas City. You may remember that Unity Church was a part of my journey, where the Bible is their main text, but they're extremely open and liberal in their approach to spirituality. I'm just saying that it may not be anti-theist enough for some of you. However, Cheri is a smart, honest, mature, emotionally intelligent person who has, like most of us, picked her beliefs wisely and with personal agency intact. She earned my respect during this conversation, even though my inner skeptic was a bit irritated at first, as you'll see. We're very honest with each other, and she stays in the ring strong and confident. I think you're going to like this talk. I wouldn't have published it if I didn't think it had value. We've talked recently on this podcast about the mystery of love, not just for another person, but for things in life. What is love, and how do we get in touch with our own tastes and pursue the things we love without apology? Post-Christian nihilism is a real thing, and I think, like narcissism, a little bit can be a good thing, in moderation and in check. But we also give ourselves permission, and maybe even need, to fall in love with our lives without God. We talk a lot here about agency, pride, and self-interest, things that were frowned upon in our former faith, and our endeavors to rediscover a healthy application of these. Ironically, we also talk a lot about death. My father died when I was 17, so I learned early on not to trust life. And now that I don't believe I'll ever see him again, how does that affect my attitude towards living? Religious narratives, especially those regarding the afterlife, heaven and hell and such, are, in my opinion, ways for humans to compartmentalize our unavoidable fear or dread of our own expiration and those of our loved ones. It can be a lot to bear, the great mystery of death, but it can also be a great source of life and a powerful attitude shifter, realizing that we're all going to die. Last week I talked about letting the fact of our impending deaths be a means by which we cut each other some slack. Everybody's doing the best they can, even if we don't think they are. Well, I heard a song this week that speaks to that. It's called We're All Gonna Die by Dawes, D-A-W-E-S. The first verse sets the scene of Taylor Goldsmith, the lead singer, who apparently has kind of lost his bearings on his life, looking out into the audience of one of his own shows, and he sees a kid dancing freely and mouthing every word of the song, like he's really enjoying himself and loving the song, and maybe even his own body and life, given the freedom with which he's dancing so freely with no thought of onlookers. And Goldsmith, the songwriter, is immediately envious of the kid's enthusiasm and asks him, "How do I fall in love with anything?" To which the kid responds, "Try not to get upset. Let it all go by. Because how can it be that bad if we're all going to die?" The second verse is him thinking of an ex-girlfriend who may have been that one that got away. She showed him, quote, the machinery that our words protect us from, and how she could keep him in the moment, and how that's all there ever was.
Show tonight, a face beyond the barricade. How you dance and you sing to every single line, like it was you up on this stage. I need to know your secret. Asking you for help. How do I fall in love with anything like you seem to do so well? I gotta get back to when it came out, the way it was supposed to sound, before money was ever changing hands and my feet were on the ground, when I could feel the wind's direction, when I knew what songs to sing. And he said, try not to get upset, everything is fine. Because she showed me the machinery that our words protect us from, how she could keep me in the moment, how that's all there ever was. I should call and ask to see her, even if it's just a couple days. I could meet her out in Georgia, or she could fly to LA. And if
today's talk with Cheri, we hear someone who is trying to honestly find as much magic and mystery in this thing we call life without self-deluding or betraying her integrity. I know I would be as spiritual as I could and still be brave and true. I want to keep my heart soft, my sensitivities heightened, and my love of life carbonated with the ether of a summer rainstorm. I could even say it's why I keep having these talks and loving every one of them, because I'm stretched, I'm emboldened, and I'm enlarged. We tape this conversation on June 10th, 2017. We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Our show's available on most podcast platforms. Actually, this week we added Google Play Music. Also, you can support us monetarily in two easy ways. You can pledge $1 per episode through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast. Or you can leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode was created by Top Shelf Sounds, a free music source on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well.
Is it Cheri or Cheri?
Cheri.
Your last name's Jamison, right?
Correct.
And you're going by your full name?
Yes.
Well, I'm Cass.
Hi, Cass. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. And you're calling from Kansas City, I take it?
Yes, I am.
I used to live in Oklahoma, went up to Kansas City a few times.
Nice.
So, you like it there?
I do. I like it a lot, actually. And surprisingly so.
How long have you been there?
Just about a year and a half.
Okay. Where were you before that?
I was in Los Angeles, California.
Wow.
I'm a California native.
Okay. And your connection to me was you are friends with John Laux?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And you heard that episode and said, hey, I've got a story to tell too.
Yep.
I enjoyed John. He's a great guy. He went through your training, or it's called Religion of Origin Healing, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I met John through Unity Village Chapel.
Oh, yeah.
We started going there approximately the same time, give or take a few weeks. Yeah. And when I ran the spirit group with this topic for the first time, Religion of Origin Healing, he and his wife joined the group.
So when did he go through that with you?
In January through March.
So we had John on episode 134, and it aired in January, yeah. Mm-hmm. So it might have been right about the same time. How long is that course? Is it
originally, I made it to be a 7-week course.
Mm-hmm. Once a week?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How long are the meetings?
About 2 hours.
Okay.
Anywhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours. But I'm running it again over at Unity Temple on the Plaza right now, and I condensed it down to about 5 weeks.
Cool. He was in the midst of it, right? So as far as that 7-week period.
Well, it was definitely part of his journey, I think.
For sure.
He talked with you guys in December, and then...
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And then I think he mentioned during the group when it was going live. And we were able to support him through some of the anxiety maybe of putting it out publicly. It
is an anxious thing for a lot of people because it might be the first time that they're going public. And,
yeah,
sometimes people come on under a pseudonym or something and try to tell their story without it necessarily getting back to their family or their employer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so religion of origin healing is something that's kind of like, I feel like I'm in the business of that as well.
Yeah, very much.
And obviously I don't have a concentrated course like you do, but, you know, Recovering from Religion, Clergy Project, a lot of organizations exist to help people cope or overcome or recover from whatever trauma, if there's trauma, or,
yeah.
You know, we just, oh gosh, I'm probably like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years out from, you know, officially deconstructing everything down to just pure atheism. And unity was a part of that stair step. And obviously one of the big things is, you know, I don't know if you know, my slogan is say yes to what is. And so if you're looking at your past and you're saying, you know, I really like to have those years back, or, you know, you kind of have thoughts of regret or shame, you know, being a yes sayer says, no, that's actually part of my formation and I'm embracing it.
Yep.
And it can be a bitter pill because you're not necessarily proud of, I mean, everybody's got stuff in their past that they're not proud of. And
sure.
So I'm sure that's part of it.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the things that I talk about with the people who participate is that, you know, just like your family of origin, you know, whatever religion you're brought up with has a huge impact on who you are, because it's part of the messaging you receive during those formative years between age, you know, from birth to age 6. And it's very hard to come out from those strongly held core beliefs.
Yeah. And the younger you are, the more impressionable you are. And so when you're coming up, like all humans, with these ontological questions, who am I? Why am I here? What's the meaning of life? And if the environment or the context in which you find yourself is Christian, you're going to walk right in to those answers. This is who I am. I'm a child of God. What's the meaning of life? Well, to glorify God and to usher in the kingdom of God, or something like that.
Yeah.
And and those are neural pathways that are kind of burned in, and takes a while to get out of some of those, if you even feel the need to.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to come on this show and this podcast is because, you know, I grew up in non-traditional churches and spiritual philosophies, and I still went through the same thing.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
So
it
it's
sounds
not
like it.
just specific to Christian based faiths, and that, you know, everybody, I think maybe it's a universal experience of growing up and maturing, that you have some kind of emotional and mental and personal wrestling with this huge part of our society, and that most of us just take at its word.
Yeah.
As truth.
Well, and I would probably push back against it being universal, because I think that there's a scale here, there's a spectrum, and
absolutely,
to the degree in which these answers, these narratives, these ideologies, to the degree of certainty, you know, that they were presented to you, is the degree in which you're going to not only have difficulty unpacking it, but maybe even trauma. So, for example, somebody is raised, you hear this a lot, like secular Jew, or even just casual social Christian, Easter and Christmas Christian or whatever. It's not pounded into them. It's not driven by fear, and it's not laden with certainty. Like, we know this is exactly the truth. God created Adam and Eve, et cetera, you know, like, just, whereas there's a lot of people raised in religious settings where they just kind of, they hold on loosely to the narratives. And I think those people are going to have a lot better success at moving forward than somebody who was traumatized by strict and strong dogma and doctrines.
Yes, absolutely. And how comfortable they are with personal growth work and, you know, questioning and introspection, and what they've been taught.
Yeah. Well, and we could say, I think maybe part of your point was it can be universal in the sense that if you were raised what we might call fundamentalist atheist, where your parents were like, we don't believe in God, and it was kind of shoved down their throats. And so when they start to have curiosities about spirituality, then they're going to have to overcome some of that stuff that was, I'm just saying it can go both ways. It's just fundamentalism. Fundamentalism in all forms is what I think is toxic about all of this. Now, getting back to your origin story or religion of origin is the Self-Realization Fellowship. So talk about that. What is that? I've never heard of that.
So Self-Realization Fellowship is a church that was founded by Paramahansa Yogananda in 1920.
Okay. I'm not going to repeat that name.
You could say Yogananda.
Okay.
And
Yoga.
I would say in a nutshell, and this is a very basic nutshell, it's like a mix between Christianity and Hinduism.
Yeah, it sounds like
so
it. Right.
It comes out of the traditions of the Eightfold Path of Yoga from India. And Yogananda was a monk, a monastic, and was in an ashram and was trained by a guru. And actually there's a line of gurus as part of the Self-Realization Fellowship tradition. And they teach scientific techniques of meditation to attain a direct personal experience of God. And the primary one that they teach is Kriya Yoga.
Okay. Did it work for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's been an interesting journey, and if you want, I can dive right in, but I just wanted to give the overview first.
Yeah. Well, let's dive right in. So your parents were this, or is this the context you grew up in?
My parents actually started off, my dad grew up, I believe, Lutheran, and my mom comes out of the Jewish tradition, though never really felt a connection to it. But when they met, they were both part of religious science, which is a new thought philosophy, similar to Unity, but is now called Centers for Spiritual Living. And while they were pregnant with me, they went through ministerial school.
Okay.
And so they joke that I was born with ministerial training. I was raised in a very spiritual environment and was nurtured in my spiritual growth. My mom taught me how to meditate when I was 2 years old.
Wow.
And I saw energy and auras and could see angels when I was a kid, and I can still to a certain degree.
Wow.
And I was thankfully nurtured in a way and was told that these things are okay. And my mom and I went through Reiki training when I was 10. And so I meditated all throughout my life. Yeah. Lifelong meditator.
Okay, I'm going to call time out because my inner skeptic just, I honestly, I have a lot of trouble with this seeing angels or seeing colors or whatever. And yet you're sitting here telling me that there's some, I guess what we might call supernatural experiences.
Yes.
That you've had.
Yes.
See, I want so bad to call bullshit. I can't believe it.
I hear you. And one of the wonderful things that I believe in is everybody has their own experience. And in a way, no one can argue with your own personal experience.
That's exactly right. And that's kind of a conversation ender when it comes to if there's going to be some kind of discussion about it. It's like I experienced it and I can't explain it and we're kind of done here. And we do have to just go, okay. But I will say this from then on and even from now on, like you and I we're 15 minutes into a conversation and for not only for the rest of this show, but for the rest of our lives, I am going to think differently of you. And I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I don't know that I trust you.
That's fine.
But I'm just saying, I'm just being honest. I'm just, I'm not saying I'm proud of it or I like it, but I just, Okay, so we're gonna continue, but I just had to say, okay, that's weird. And like the naturalist in me says that doesn't happen for anybody. It's somehow your imagination. It's your brain playing tricks on you. I've got some other explanation in order for me to not think that you're a pathological liar or delusional. I experience you as, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say that you're an honest person of integrity. And this is your experience. And that's how I'm going to go forward. It's just okay.
Yep, absolutely. And you know what? I mean, exactly what you just shared is why when I was at least 12, I shut it down.
Oh, yeah, because people would have that. At least they'd begin to look at you differently. If you shared with them, hey, do you guys see that floating blue blob across the room or something? And they would be like, okay.
Exactly. And so when I had the self-awareness as a child to realize that this was quote unquote weird.
Or maybe it's a gift, Yeah,
that not everybody else experienced this, and that it was safer for me to keep quiet about it.
Yeah.
Than to share openly.
Okay, I'm thinking of X-Men, where the parents of mutants have to pull them aside and say, Johnny, you're special, and you're going to have to keep this to yourself, or all your high school peers are going to ostracize you or bully you.
Exactly. And I was born and raised in Fresno, California, which is actually very similar now that I live in the Midwest. In hindsight, Fresno is very much like a Midwest town. Okay. There's a Christian church on every corner. It's very family oriented, very, a strong current of conservatism, conservative values.
Okay. So definitely one of the lesser progressive cities in the state of California.
I suppose so. I know that's probably not true across the board. At least it was.
It's a big state. I've never been there.
My perception of it was in the time that I grew up there. And so I learned how to not share.
Mind your own business, yeah.
And especially because growing up kind of jointly in New Thought, which is Centers for Spiritual Living, and Unity, and I started singing at Unity churches when I was 12.
Okay, so I've got to figure out something. You were kind of raised in this Unity type stuff with meditation. So far, it seems to have been a good experience. And then I know now that you're still cool with Unity and active in these kind of spiritual things.
Yep.
So what happened in the middle where you had an exit of some sort from SRF, Self-Realization Fellowship, that was traumatic?
Yeah. So my mom and I got more involved with Self-Realization Fellowship from the time I was probably 8, 9, somewhere in there. And so, and my parents got divorced at that time.
Okay. There's one. That's a trauma. Now, do you have any siblings?
I do not. I'm an only child.
Okay. Only child. So you and your mom, you stay with your mom, your dad leaves.
Yep. I mean, he moved to Los Angeles shortly after that. So my mom and I started going exclusively to, or maybe not completely exclusively to Self-Realization Fellowship, but that was when SRF became a primary, I would say, my primary religion at that time.
Do they have Sunday morning meetings like everybody else?
They do, though it depends on how big of a community there is in any given city.
Okay.
So in my hometown of Fresno, there was a small meditation group. Okay. And we met at the home of a lovely Indian couple, and we would all gather together, and they have pre-written, readings, and we would have a meditation time and fellowship afterwards.
Okay, but just a small group of people, so you didn't actually meet in a building.
Right, we met in a home.
And just once a week? Yeah.
Yep. And but in Los Angeles, where the headquarters of Self-Realization Fellowship is, there are large centers that are called temples, SRF temples. So, and that was actually one of the reasons I ended up going to school in Los Angeles, was because I wanted to be closer to the SRF temples and communities.
And those are still there and they're thriving like lots of people go?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, when you were going throughout your high school years and stuff, were you just going to public school? So you didn't have a real sheltered life necessarily.
No.
Okay.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I certainly, like, I wasn't homeschooled.
Yeah.
But I would say that I chose to not engage with a lot of outward things, which is part of the SRF tradition in some ways.
So there is an SRF thing where we are kind of, maybe, we don't go, did you go to the prom?
I did, yes.
Okay, so you have a boyfriend and...
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so normal high school stuff.
That's another story. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, had boyfriends and experienced life and did drama and singing, so
Okay.
it was good.
Yeah.
But one of the things about Self-Realization Fellowship is that they have a very clear set of rules and guidelines on how to be spiritual.
All right.
And at the time, I was like, great, this is amazing. I've got a outline of how I should live my life and the kind of person I should be and what to eat and what not to eat and drink and all of these things. Self-realization or enlightenment is the goal of life. That's what I was taught, was the goal of life. And that here's a step-by-step process for me and set of guidelines for how to do that and how to be a quote-unquote spiritual person.
Yeah.
So I ended up building my entire persona as a young person around that.
Yeah, around those structures. And that felt good.
It felt really good.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was totally into it, 100%. And I think that the hardest part was that in my hometown, there were hardly any other people my age. And so most of my conversations about spirituality and explorations about all of that was either done with my family or with adults.
Yeah. So your spiritual journey didn't have a lot of peers, but your mentors were older.
Yeah.
Where did it go south for you?
It started with, I would say in summary, it was like the disillusionment of some core ideas.
Okay.
Number one, that SRF was special and different. Number two, that the monks and nuns who were renunciants of Self-Realization Fellowship, and especially our Guru Yogananda, were saints and somehow beyond humans.
Oh, wow.
And then the third thing was really a breaking down of the self-righteous persona I had built up for myself.
Okay.
So I would say the first crack in that persona, if you will, started when I was in college at the University of Southern California. And I was in an Eastern religions class. And I remember reading, I know. So I remember reading in a textbook about Hinduism and about the Eightfold Path of Yoga. And they had an outline of my exact religious beliefs, like the core tenets, if you will.
Right there in the textbook.
Right there in front of me. And I was shocked.
Probably published 10, 20, 30 years prior. So it's like, wait a second. Everybody already knows about this?
Exactly.
And they're looking at it under an academic microscope?
Yeah. And I felt hurt because I thought that what I had been taught was really unique and that nobody else really knew it.
Yeah.
And I also felt really vulnerable because I felt like someone had revealed something publicly that I thought was really sacred.
Oh, yeah.
And in a way that was, like textbook cold. So that was one of the first times where it made me really uncomfortable and really made me realize that how much I didn't know and what a small world I had been living in at that time. I mean, I was like 18. So,
right.
And then another crack in the persona happened when I was in class studying directing for opera. I was a vocal performance major studying opera at USC. And we had a brilliant opera director named Ken Kazan. And I deeply admired him for being able to bring out the multidimensionality and authenticity of characters in opera. And I had never seen anything like that before. It was just so compelling. And so in that class, I had chosen an opera about Gandhi by Philip Glass called Satyagraha. And the basis of the text, like the lyrics for this opera, were based off of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a sacred text from India.
Mm-hmm.
And Krishna was one of the characters, which is like the Christ of India. Mm-hmm. And both Gandhi and Krishna in the self-realization are considered saintly, saints, And so in essence, I thought I was going to be so spiritual by studying this opera, and I was very sorely wrong.
Okay.
And so I was reading the autobiography of Gandhi as research for this class.
Right.
And I was reading it like Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi, which, if you want to learn about Self-Realization Fellowship, that's the book to read.
Okay.
A very clear sense of Yogananda as a person and the philosophy behind Self-Realization Fellowship.
So you go into this with a little naivete thinking Gandhi's one of my peeps. And what happens?
So I was approaching the directing of this opera almost like a religious play, and we were doing a character study, and I was reading Gandhi's autobiography like it was just all truth and a demonstration of Gandhi's sainthood. Mm-hmm. And at one point, Ken told me that I was being completely one-sided in my analysis of the character and proceeded to tell me about the whole shadow side of Gandhi, how manipulative and controlling he was, that he beat his wife, and that those aspects needed to somehow be portrayed in the production I was preparing. Mm-hmm. And I left the class feeling really upset and really angry and confused. Not at Ken, but at myself. Mm-hmm. Because I was finally starting to see how short-sighted and self-righteous, really, I was being about people in general, and that I wasn't able to see them as full, complex human beings.
Yeah. Well, your bubble got popped. I mean, your image of these, it was kind of like maybe a kid first learning that there's no Santa Claus. It's just really disappointing.
Yeah, or that your parents aren't perfect.
Yeah, these are some hard realizations in all these other things that happen to everybody. But when you're knee-deep in a religiosity or spirituality that you've kind of hung your hat on, when it starts to show, like you said, cracks, or, that it's not as ideal or perfect as I thought it was, that's a big letdown. And maybe, like you said, you could go from just kind of being on top of the world to feeling stupid and maybe even duped.
Yeah. And then finally, when I went to school, I went to the University of Santa Monica, which teaches spiritual psychology. I felt like what they taught gave me a practical, workable way of applying in my daily life the esoteric messages I had received in SRF. For example, we were taught in SRF that you should love unconditionally. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really know how to do that. I was like, just like be nice to everybody. And at USM, I was taught how to do self-forgiveness of judgments that I make about others in the world. And so through that, I was able to get like a hands-on way to practice loving unconditionally by letting go of judgments until I trained my mind not to make judgments as much. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like establishing new habits.
Right. New habit. Yeah. You're looking to practice and exercise this minimalization of judgment till eventually you're walking around unconditionally in love with everything.
Yeah, or at least being able to get there more quickly.
Yeah, okay.
And one of the things I really resonated with in the USM curriculum is that our humanity is really part of our spirituality.
Yeah, well, I would say so, sure. Yeah, especially as a humanist and a non-supernaturalist. That's the only place that I go now, is just the, if you will, the spirituality or even the divinity, the sacredness of being human. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, you know the term, that the Christ in you that we say at Unity. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember just jumping all over that when I went from Christianity to Unity. Mm-hmm. I remember asking a guy once, I said, "Do you guys believe that Jesus is the Son of God?" And he said, "Well, yeah, kind of, but no more so than you and I."
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. Which resonated with me because I always felt like Jesus whenever, Jesus is the one who said, you are the light of the world. Mm-hmm. He was saying that to human beings. We were trying to make him the light of the world, and he was turning around saying no.
Yeah.
I always felt like that there was all these songs about laying our crowns down at the feet of Jesus, and I always saw Jesus picking up the crown and putting it back on our heads.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
Yeah, because I didn't have any room for a jealous God. I didn't have any room for an insecure God that needed to be praised.
Yeah.
I liked the idea of a God who deflected praise back to you and said, no, you got what it takes. You're the light of the world. So all that resonated with me. And anyway, back to your story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that I never had to go through in my deconstruction, because I was raised in philosophies where they talk about being born blessed, that you're a soul and part of God. And so I never had the message that I was a sinner.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
But I will say this, though. That might be at the other end of the spectrum of that. Could be just as toxic. I don't know. You tell me. But there is a tendency in Hindu and some of these more woo-woo religions that they'll tap a baby and say, oh, my gosh, the anointing, I don't know what word you guys use, but the anointing on this one is strong, or something like that. Mm-hmm. To where we'll peg some kid before he even knows how to pick his own nose. And we'll say, oh, he's so spiritual. You can there's mostly because of reincarnation, like so-and-so's, right. Reincarnated in that person.
Right.
And so you lay that on a person, that can be heavy too.
Yeah. It's sort of that goes back to the nature versus nurture question. And
I don't know who I was talking with yesterday. Oh, it was last night. I was at a friend's, and she actually spent some time in Kansas City and Unity and things, and so this is part of her journey. But she was telling about a particular guru that they had raised and fostered from a child to basically, saying he's the one, this is the one. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then he comes of age. I mean, he did all the studies. He spent, because what they do is they just set this person aside to study and meditate and, whatever, nirvana and Zen and all the pursuits. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so he didn't have a day job. He's literally spent his life as, practicing all these things. So he comes of age, and everybody's kind of looking at him to take over this religion and be the guru. And he completely dispels it and says, you're all just as special as me. There's nothing, Mm-hmm. And he deflected it, and she was just praising him for such a thing, Because I just think it's silly to elevate one person over another as far as you've got more mojo.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if this is the philosophy of like Unity specifically, but at least at USM, I could say this is true, that the idea is that we are already as spiritual as we're ever going to be.
Okay.
And that you don't have to do anything in order to be more spiritual.
Yeah.
It's more of a process of deconditioning what you learn from the society and the world, and also of your own making in your mind, mm-hmm. to come back to that essential nature of love.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
And that's it,
Yeah.
So now I personally feel like my philosophy on spirituality in life is simply love and serve.
Yeah. And be.
Yeah.
As opposed to you're on a treadmill, a performance gerbil wheel that never arrives, and you constantly feel like you're a disappointment to God. That's some of the stuff that, I've heard a lot about, and I did it myself within Christianity, because there is this measuring, there's this, a high jump or pole vault bar that you're trying to reach over and over again, failing and failing and failing. And the shame and the self-disgust are pretty toxic.
Yeah. And I would say that coming from a family that has the Jewish cultural tradition of accomplishment orientation in life, I applied that to my spiritual growth as a child and as a young adult. And so I did see, that's why I said I built my persona around becoming this spiritual person, or at least I thought that at the time. It was very goal-oriented and had a lot to do with, the outward expression of or inhibition of certain natural things. And so kind of circling back around, when things started breaking down, I ended up choosing to stop attending self-realization fellowship temples because I was feeling that the disconnect from what I felt like was true for me now and what I was hearing coming from the speakers on Sundays. Yeah. But there was still this like magnetic pull, like I should feel like it's right, but it just wasn't anymore.
Yeah, to some degree, you couldn't unlearn what you had learned in school. So in school, academia kind of knocked this thing off its pedestal in your mind, and then you go back, and they're still trying to claim that they're on the pedestal, and you're like, no, I don't. You guys aren't as hip as you think you are.
Well, I mean, it was. And part of it stemmed from the fact that I had taken all of this as truth. And I don't think that SRF touts themselves as the only truth. Okay. They are very accepting of all paths that lead to enlightenment. I think that's how they say it. And
okay, so from their perspective, it's not their fault that you overdrank the Kool-Aid.
What do you mean?
Well, it's not the religion. It's not SRF's fault that you took it. So seriously. Right. Okay. Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the main things that helped me come to peace about it was that through my healing process, I realized that I had done all of this to myself. Okay. That it really wasn't anybody's fault from Yogananda to the community, that I just had interpreted it a certain way. And I don't think I'm alone in that. No. And there are certainly a wide spectrum of SRF devotees that have various levels of fundamentalism, if you will, the degree to which they accept or don't accept other people. And as it is with everyone, right? Yeah. And all different religions. Sure. And so when I was able to come to terms with that and forgive myself for all those things that I had bought into and taken so seriously and was really hard on myself, I think that was the biggest thing. I was incredibly cruel to myself in my own mind about all of this. And it was painful. It's really painful. Yeah, see, and I'm glad you're getting there, because in our email exchange, you mentioned it took you 6 years of, and I think you used the phrase, suffering silently. Like you kind of kept it to yourself, and and 6 years. And I guess up until this point, I hadn't really heard how and why this was so devastating, other than just how much you maybe internally needed it to be true. And then when it kind of fragmented a little bit, and not from its claims, but from your projection of its claims. Yeah. Yep. Now you're actually dealing with the more realistic claims that their religion has. Yeah. And so I'm curious, I mean, how traumatic was it for you when your dad left?
Of course it was hard.
Did you take that personal at all? Like, what's wrong with me, or did I do this?
Consciously, my parents were very good about telling me that it was not anything personal.
And they didn't badmouth each other? Like, it wasn't a real hostile thing? No. But my relationship with my dad did change at that point, and it was hard. Well, the reason I ask is that as a kid, or just a naive human, that really you haven't emerged into some of the more harsh realities of life yet. Yeah. And this is fun, and this is frolicky, and life is good, and there's meaning, and there's trajectory, and there's an arc of justice, and this universe is cohesive, and it has full of meaning and purpose, and again, these aren't even things that you question as a child. It's just assumed. But then as things start to show up that kind of take a wrecking ball to some of that Pollyanna or naivete, like maybe in your mind it never occurred to you that your parents weren't just going to love each other till they died. And so when one thing gives away, so if, like you're in a river and you're drowning and you've got two logs and one of them gets away from you, you're going to double down on the one that you have. Like you're going to really grab onto that. So I'm just trying to think of like maybe some of the reasons why you latched onto it with such rigor.
That's a good question. I think part of it was that it did make sense to me at the time.
Sure.
At the ripe old age of 9. And also, yeah, when my dad left, it was my mom and I. She raised me as a single mom at that point with full custody.
And it sounded like you both kind of doubled down. Like she got more serious about her faith too.
Oh, yes, very much. And she and I definitely became very close, very enmeshed even, if you will.
Well, you cling to each other.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. And
you rode that storm out together.
Yes.
What's your relationship with her now?
We have had we're good now. I think we're both working on being closer, and we've had good conversations about kind of updating our relationship to being from a more adult to adult perspective. And
right, you've got a master's in spiritual psychology, right?
Correct.
So you're no stranger to talk therapy, cognitive therapy, ways and means and tools to help one mature.
Yes.
And even the natural rites of passage that happens to all children. And so no, there's this cutting of the umbilical cord, and especially since you clung to each other through the storm of your dad's departure, through those formative years. And then, I mean, part of establishing differentiation and individuation is, and it ain't always going to be pretty. I think when we're Siamese twins, it connected at the hip by tendons and muscles and things, and then we decide, I really need to live a powerful, independent, mature adult life. That process of taking a knife, to those tendons, it ain't always going to feel good. Yeah. And so I imagine there were some things said or some ways expressed that maybe even the way you left SRF was maybe hurtful to your mom, or, either whatever. There's ways of you establishing your independence. Yes.
And I could tell a lot of stories around that. We went through a long period of turmoil. And my mom is actually a marriage family therapist with a specialty in trauma therapy and EMDR.
But sometimes the physician does have to heal theirself. Yes. Just because the science doesn't mean you're not going to be subject to some of the shit that comes with being a human. Yeah, and I think the most telling part of my healing process, because at the end of the six years, it was 2014. My husband was going through this University of Santa Monica master's program, and I decided to audit the second year again with him. And in that year, one of the big projects we have is a relationship project where you take the most challenging relationship in your life and you apply the curriculum in a very scientific way to that relationship. I actually chose Yogananda as my relationship project because it felt like an estranged parent to me. Okay. I had all of these parental type issues with him in my head. And the way that the guru-disciple relationship is in Self-Realization Fellowship is that you talk to the guru all the time. You chant or you meditate or you visualize the guru with you and you pray. And we're talking about a deceased person, right? Yes, we were never on the planet at the same time. Right. He founded this thing in 1920.
Yes, and
Okay.
he left his body in 1952.
Okay.
And so this was a very real internal relationship for me.
Okay.
And, so much so that I was even considering becoming a nun. And one of my best friends became a nun. And I worked at the Self-Realization Fellowship headquarters. I'm giving a little context here to check out that lifestyle to see if it was something I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And even though I didn't end up doing that, what I did love about working there and being there was that everybody was so dedicated to their spiritual path and serving the world and having that spirit-centered life.
Yeah. Now, this organization does good for the poor, or like they impact society, or is it just mostly navel gazing?
I'll have to check. I don't know all of the things they do, but at least the side of the organization that I was working with was the administrative end.
Okay.
So I was in the office where I answered the telephones for everybody who was calling into the international headquarters. Okay. And then there were membership services and counseling and prayer.
Yeah, but for a fact that there are pockets or wings or sects of this organization that are on the ground level. They're working with, I don't know, I'm just curious. Is it anything like the Catholics or something to where they're driven and one of their primary things is to serve the poor?
Ah, I see. I think more of it is educational. Mm-hmm.
They're trying to enlighten the public.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So bringing
not food, but knowledge.
And to advocate for the cultural and spiritual understanding between East and West.
Okay. Yeah. Bridge building.
And serve mankind as one's larger self.
Okay.
So
is your friend still a nun?
She is, yes.
You correspond with her at all?
I do from time to time, though she doesn't have a lot of access outside of the ashram.
Okay.
But yes, she just had a birthday and I sent her an email.
All right. Well, let's get back to this project of the relationship with the yoga.
So it's set up like a scientific experiment where you sort of check the subjective temperature of the relationship at the beginning for several months. And then there's a period of time where you do a treatment plan, in which you craft yourself. And then after a few months, then you stop doing the treatment plan and take the temperature of the relationship again. And you use rating scales and all this stuff. It's a way to take a very subjective experience like a relationship and the quality of a relationship and put numbers on it and apply, was the thing that you did effective in changing your perception of the relationship? Mm-hmm. The primary tenet that's underneath all of that is that all relationships happen inside of you. And that, yes, there is an outward expression of that relationship, but the vast majority of the relationship happens inside.
Okay.
Because we all have our perceptions, our blinders that we've got over our eyes, that you can't see reality just purely as it is. And so by changing the inner experience, very often it can change the outer experience.
Okay. And
so this was especially true with my relationship project with Yogananda, which was completely an internal relationship to begin with.
Yeah.
So I would say that, and my intention in choosing Yogananda was to clear up the misunderstandings, the projections, or misidentifications I had had regarding his teachings, and to establish a neutral and ideally loving inner relationship with Yogananda.
Right. So going from hostile or like disappointed to at least neutral and maybe even a little further over to I respect this guy again.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I described it kind of like my deconstruction or disillusionment process was kind of like a bad breakup. Uh-huh. And he felt like an estranged parent, someone that I loved very, very deeply, but had a ton of judgments that were covering up the hurt I felt. So leading up to this, I had found it easier to distance myself internally towards Yogananda than to face it earlier.
Okay. Let me just say that this conversation and your journey is definitely the first. I've never had a guest like you saying the things that you're saying. I've had people that were Christians and they remained Christians even while on the show. They were practicing Christians. Mm-hmm. I've never had somebody this, Hindu-y or spiritual who's still sticking to their guns. I mean, like they're still practicing this.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, so when you're doing these religion of origin healing sessions with people, helping them recover, heal from whatever damage that was done by their religion of origin.
Yeah.
I mean, I know with John Laux, he's kind of remained pseudo-Christian. Mm-hmm. Do you have people in the group that are just full-blown atheists?
I have not yet had someone who's atheist in my group. I very much want one. I would love to have someone from all religious backgrounds come through, because really there is no requirement in my course to believe anything before, during, or after the program.
Yeah, you're not trying to convince anybody of anything.
No, it's their personal journey. And really, I just took the experience I went through, the processes and some of the tools that I used in my own healing journey, and created a program that could be applied to anybody, regardless of what their religion of origin is.
I think probably one of the things that may be a deterrent for especially somebody that is just a full-blown naturalist. There is a spectrum to where you ask somebody, hey, do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in haunted houses? Do you believe in an afterlife? Do you believe in reincarnation? Do you believe that the dead are with us in a sentient way or a conscientious way? And you're going to have everybody say, yeah, maybe. Part of me does, part of me doesn't. You're going to have a spectrum of those types of people. Yeah. But then most atheists that, I shouldn't say most, I have no way of measuring that, but a lot of the atheists that I know, including myself, once I made a decision that nothing supernatural has ever happened, ever will happen. I mean, pretty sweeping thing. I mean, and it's not even about God at that point. I know part of my deconstruction was there better not be a God, because if there is, and the amount of times that he chooses to intervene or, engage are so rare and so nonsensical that he's an asshole, so this funny thing about atheism is one of the first steps is you kind of hate God, and then you realize there is no God, and so you feel like you've been shadow boxing this whole time, and now it's the equivalent of saying I hate unicorns or whatever. I mean, so now we come all the way back to I don't not believe in supernaturalism because I need for it not to be true in order to take God off the hook. There's that, but now I don't know. There's almost a stoicism, a coldness that has come over my heart and mind regarding the absurdity of the universe. And I went from, really wanting and looking for meaning, in things. There are philosophers out there that who have formed some theories about the absurdity of life, and that there is no sense to this. It's complete and utter chaos. It's random. And I realized that there's even times that I myself will kind of think about how magical and how amazing it is, even that you and I are sitting here talking, and how that we can't be the random accidents of, single cell organisms dividing over and over again until here we are.
Yeah.
And I realized that it's not that simple, and it's not that complex. I don't know. But anyway, long story short is that the reason that I probably wouldn't take your class is that I don't have any grid for this stuff anymore. Like, it's not a language that I speak anymore. And so, like, even this episode, I will probably have to preface this episode with a warning that if you're a staunch naturalist who has no patience or use whatsoever for spiritualism, this is not going to be the show for you. But if you do have like 1 foot in and 1 foot out, then this might be a good conversation for you to hear. I don't know.
Yeah.
All of that to say, I'm just noticing how unique this conversation is compared to the rest of my 150 some episodes.
Cool. Well, that's great to hear that it's unique, and and the beautiful thing is that with it doesn't matter to me what your current belief systems are.
Yeah.
My class, the Religion of Origin Healing Program, is simply a spotlight on the religion you grew up with.
Yeah.
And what the messages were you received from that time in your life. And it gives an opportunity to introspect on what's true for you today. But it really is not about necessarily what's true today. It's looking in a safe environment, just what the context was that you were raised in this one particular area.
Well, and I think you're saying also that it's not about your beliefs. And
No, not at all.
As a true therapist, you're completely neutral.
Mm-hmm. I try to be.
Well, yeah. Well, like you said, you're not trying to convince anybody or
Right.
proselytize anybody.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I find it, probably like you, I find it fascinating to hear people's stories.
Well, give me an example of what you might do, like say an exercise that you'll do with the group.
So one of the first couple weeks, I just give an introspection exercise, and I've got a list of a massive amount of brainstormed, topics about like, what were the messages you received about this and about sexuality, about, the role of women and men in the world, the role of pastors or teachers, thinking about what to wear, or what to eat or not to wear, and what not to eat, all the rituals.
Mm-hmm.
So just thinking about, what message did I receive, and what did I interpret that to mean?
And are they writing this down in some kind of journal or something?
Yeah, I recommend just free form stream of consciousness writing.
Yeah.
Whatever you remember, and it's actually the subjective remembrance that's most important.
I think so too.
Because what was actually said may not be what you heard or experienced.
Yeah. When you say subjective, you're kind of maybe that sense where don't overthink this, just write the first thing that comes to mind. Exactly. Yeah.
And then you have the opportunity to really look at that and consider, what do I want to do with this now?
Mm-hmm.
What's true for me now? So it's sort of a mix between those sorts of introspective journal exercises and research. So I have people do genogram work.
No, I don't know what that is.
A genogram is like a family tree that contains additional information.
Oh, yeah, okay, generational.
Yeah. And so they look at, because religion of origin is very closely tied to family.
Sure.
So they look at, what was the religion of your parents? Did they go through any changes in their religions over the course of their lifetime?
Mm-hmm.
Your grandparents' religion, did they go through any changes?
Mm-hmm.
Your great, so and on. That's because very often your religion of origin is passed down from parent to child.
Absolutely. 90% of the time, probably. I mean,
yeah.
How else do you get it?
So,
sometimes people go out and find it on their own, but most of the time it's handed to them. That, and speaking of your parents, I kind of want to get back to your personal story.
Sure.
Is your mom still in SRF?
She is, yes.
Okay, and you're not?
Correct.
Now, do you have a hostile relationship with SRF, or are you kind of like forgiving that whole thing and yourself and just water under the bridge?
Yeah, I feel completely at peace.
Okay, but it's not for you anymore.
No, I personally have found I've chosen a different set of meditation techniques to use myself.
Yeah.
And I've also chosen to focus in on my own personal inner spiritual life rather than, and at this point, thankfully, I've come to a place where as long as I'm in a community of loving people that are dedicated to their own personal growth, then it works for me.
Well, me too. I could say that for sure. That's kind of the holy grail. You find a community of people, they're all committed to their own emotional health. That's jackpot.
Yeah. And you know, to me, like, religions are kind of like flavors. You know, if this really works for you and you take the time to work it, then you can learn something and I truly believe in taking what works and letting go of what doesn't work.
Yeah. All right. You've just summarized why I even agreed to have you on the show. Is because I really want to live that way. I want to turn people loose. It's none of my business. I mean, I've had the Messiah complex my whole life within Christianity, and I don't want it to carry over into my atheism or something. I literally want to embrace human beings where they're at, and like you said, as long as they're not toxic to me, which if they are, I'm just going to avoid them. Even then, I'm not going to try to convert them. I'm just not going to be around you. Yeah. But the ones that are, man, they're super people, they're sweethearts, they're kind, they're thoughtful, they're compassionate, they're empathetic, and they happen to believe in, fairies or something. I'm not, at that point, I have to throw up my hands and say, wow, who knew? None of my business. And I like the product. Yeah.
And to me, at this point in my journey, I feel like one's personal spiritual life is so intimate and so personal. It's like your sexuality.
I would say, I was thinking the same thing. You're just like naked.
Nobody is in your own body and your own mind. And so how could I possibly tell you what your experience is?
Yeah. Or make a judgment on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've come to this place of, stopping pretending that I'm God and thinking that I know what's going on for anybody else or even in the world. And just really, if people trust me enough to open up and share what their experience is, then I feel honored by that, and I'm going to listen to them with an open heart and see how I can support them.
Yeah. Because otherwise they'll never open up to you again.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to be that safe space, right?
Yeah. And building up that spiritual self-confidence.
Yeah.
Where I feel like, I feel confident in my own personal spiritual life. And so I don't feel threatened by other people's experience, no matter how intense it might be.
Yeah. Well, and you're afforded that by not believing in a judgmental afterlife.
Correct. That's true.
Which, coming from Christianity, I think there's a lot of people that would like to have the liberty to smorgasbord their faith, like you're prescribing. But certain pockets of Christianity are very rigid about, no, every word of God is true and, da-da-da.
Yeah.
I would like to be embracing and kind and supportive of my LGBT brothers and sisters, but, I got to stick to the word. My loyalty is to the Bible, and therefore you're forced to be disloyal to some of the closest, nearest, and dearest people in your life. It's tragic.
Yeah, yeah.
So before we move on, your dad, is he still in SRF or religious or spiritual?
Actually, I just thought about this the other day. I don't know what his current spiritual leanings are.
Okay.
I think he has his own thing, and but he's very kind.
So you don't communicate with him that much, or
we don't have as close a relationship as maybe as I would like. And I also, my mom got remarried when I was 17 or 18, and she at least started dating my stepdad when I was 17. And he was very much a dad to me.
Okay.
And he's also still very much involved with Self-Realization Fellowship.
Okay. Did your dad remarry?
He did, yes.
Okay. So they both kind of moved on, but you haven't maintained a very intimate relationship with him.
With my dad, no.
That's cool. There's no judgment. I'm just trying to figure out his journey too.
Exactly.
Okay, so what do you do for a living? Is this you're a counselor for a living?
I'm a professional singer.
Okay.
And I also do consulting work, sort of like life coaching for performing artists, and also consulting with arts organizations. I recently left a job working at a music agency. It was a worldwide music booking agency, and I was vice president of operations for 2 years and was doing a lot of logistics and I was running the day-to-day operations of the whole company. And we had artists that were touring nationwide and abroad in China and the Middle East. And it was a very exciting, wonderful experience. But I didn't really imagine myself going into arts administration. I always thought of myself more as a performer. Mm-hmm. And so I realized that I wanted to have more time and space to do my own music and work more with artists.
Yeah, you want to be in the trench and not in the ivory tower.
Yeah, exactly. And I love musicians. I love the artistic personality. I relate and engage with all kinds of artistic personalities, whether they're visual artists or musicians or administrators. And it is a very small world too in the music industry. And so,
it sounds like you're somewhat of a chaplain to the arts world.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
People come to you they know that you're somebody they can talk to. In some cases it's a professional type encounter, and others it's just casual.
Exactly. And, I've helped people overcome stage fright. I've worked with people in their marketing and branding and their career development. So I would say, if you could boil my passions down into 3 words, it would be the arts, entrepreneurship, and spirituality.
Okay. You mentioned your husband earlier. Is he religious, or spiritual? He's
very spiritual. He has his own personal spiritual path that's different from mine, which is great. But we have a wonderful, healthy marriage and support each other in our spiritual growth. And he was brought up in unity, then went through his own process of going away from religion for a while and then coming back. And he was involved with Centers for Spiritual Living for many years and became a licensed practitioner in Centers for Spiritual Living. Now, since we came back to the Midwest, we've been attending Unity and getting more and more involved. And he even wrote a book that is called Church-Free Spirituality, a spiritual practice beyond the bounds of religion.
Cool.
And so for those who, as you mentioned before, maybe have one foot in, one foot out, that might be a great resource.
Yeah, actually, just in thinking out loud here, sometimes I'm curious about my own kids because, they were preachers' kids up until about 10 years ago. And they've pursued their own thing, but I could tell that for a while they weren't ready to let go of Jesus or whatever. And now they all seem to just be fully what we might call apatheists, where it just doesn't matter. But they also don't have a spiritual practice probably of any kind.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here wondering, hey, maybe maybe a spiritual practice is not a bad thing. Here's the thing. At the end of the day, as long as I'm not self-deluding, as long as I'm not lying to myself or acting on fear or acting on wishful thinking, I think, and you sound so scientific. I mean, even the SRF, you mentioned that their meditation was scientifically grounded.
Yep.
And are you familiar with Sam Harris, the atheist author and neuroscientist?
No, I'm thinking of Sam Harris, the Broadway singer.
Okay. Well, Sam Harris is an active participant and voice in the atheist world. He wrote a book called The End of Faith, and he's got a podcast. But he wrote a book called Waking Up, where he endorses, practices, prescribes various spiritual disciplines of meditation as an atheist. And so, anyway, I'm just saying that not only your journey and your story and your life, but your husband's book and all this stuff, that there's resources maybe for my listeners that they're like saying, I've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I really miss some of the disciplines and practices of spirituality.
Right.
And I'm over my anger phase. I'm over my shame phase. And now I'm ready to maybe look back into, like you said with the smorgasbord, I'm the one that dropped the word smorgasbord, but as far as selecting and being able to go back and say, I can pick and choose what parts of this work for me and what don't.
Yeah, exactly. And there are spiritual communities out there. There are people in the world that will accept you wherever you're at in your spiritual journey, and that it's not a requirement to believe in absolutely everything.
Unitarian Universalist, those kind of places, yeah.
And, of course, each individual person you come in contact with will be different, but like there are loving, open-hearted, inclusive communities out there where you can find spiritual community and even believe differently from any given person in the room.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that I've noticed about your spiritual journey is that I think we can say that in those teen years when you were kind of naive, there was, I think you even used the word esoteric earlier, that there's a sense where I'm onto something that very few people understand. The world doesn't understand it. I'm hip to some information that is privy to me. And part of your realization in college was, it's in the textbook. And then being open and, like you said, inclusive to, other people do things a little differently. There's not a one way, I guess.
Yeah, and that it's individual.
Yeah.
Like everybody, in a way, it's part of the, as you said, like an individuation process of figuring out what is true today for you, and that nobody else can really and truly say what that is except for you. Yeah. So the personal growth work that I did as part of that relationship project with Yogananda, it was a very personal thing that was the way that I dealt with my own doubts and fears and judgments. And I kept it very quiet, and to myself for a long time. And it's only been very recently that I felt comfortable sharing it with others. And part of the Religion of Origin healing program, it felt risky because I was sharing, my very personal story, my very personal process, and knowing that it could be helpful to others, but that sometimes I still struggle with the words to say, what my full journey was, because, I do still have some fears around how other people will take it, or they might project onto me or think that it means that just because I left Self-Realization Fellowship or no longer participate, that I somehow judge them for being part of it. And I don't. Yeah. Like I feel so grateful to Yogananda and to SRF because it's part of who I am. It's part of what made me the kind of person I am today. And that I still have friends, I still have family in SRF, and I, in a way, I feel like I am actually expressing the core values and the core message that Yogananda wanted each and every person to experience more now than I did when I was so rigid about what I was doing in my day-to-day practice.
That's the irony of some of this stuff, because I think I agree too, because as you're speaking, it just dawns on me that you took the high road. Like, instead of blaming SRF for lying to you, or, you didn't look outside for the blame game. You looked inside, not for another chapter of the blame game, but for what can I do, maybe, not even do, Because, I don't know. You went inside, as opposed to blaming others. So I'd say you took the high ground, and then, like you just said, you feel like that part of the tools that you ended up using to get healed from whatever trauma you experienced from that departure, you actually got those tools from SRF. And you're using those tools, and so Yogananda or whatever, I can't say his name, but.
You got it right.
Of course, I think he's unconscious. He's in his grave, and that's my belief. But if he were listening and watching, he'd be going, "Oh, she finally got it."
Yeah. So based off of what you just said, I would say that I took personal responsibility for my own spiritual life and my own belief system, and I used what I had learned in all of these different communities to craft something that felt good and personal for me, and built confidence in that over the course of, several years and working with myself on it. But that it is possible. It's possible. Peace is possible. And it doesn't matter what religion you come out from, that you have the right and choice to do that if you so choose.
Well, you don't seem like a person that is, I know I've used the term already in the show once, but woo-woo or just wishy-washy or emotionally unstable or easily self-delusional or loaded down with wishful thinking. Like, you don't seem like a person that urgently needs for the world to make sense. And so I'm going to stick to this because I just can't release it, You sound like a scientific person, a logical person, an intelligent person, an emotionally intelligent person.
Thank you.
And you practice, you hold on to some of these things. I think really this is so complicated and nuanced that I don't think myself or my listeners are going to have any clue almost as to what your practice actually looks like without spending a week as a fly on the wall in your life. And so,
or in my own brain.
Yeah. And like you said, it's intimate as sex. It's very internal. It's just you. And I think we've acknowledged here on this show, we say it all the time, that no two humans on the planet believe the same things. And at least you're saying out loud, yeah. And so let's go with that. Let's acknowledge that that's true and be okay with the fact that no two humans on the planet believe the same things about grand narratives or the meaning of life or the ontological questions. But I guess what I'm saying is I can't push back against the fact that you've hung on to some things because I have yet to see it lived out and what that looks like. And there's a good chance that I might go, this is something that I want to incorporate back into my life.
Wow.
I don't know. I'm just wanting to be open as opposed to I don't know if you know this, Cheri, but there's going to be people that write me and say, why the hell did you have her on? She's not one of us. And even as I'm sitting here, and I know I have to edit this, in my mind, I'm thinking internally, am I even going to be able to publish this? And if so, what's going to be the takeaway? And so I'm just being honest with you that I think one of them is that I love to parade people. When we think that we've broad brushed a certain demographic or stereotypical group of people that are woo-woo or whatever, it's almost like the reason the LGBT movement, took off is because eventually people knew one. I have a friend that's gay and I think they're fantastic, and so I can't afford to hate them just because I know I'm supposed to.
Yeah.
I can hate a straw man, but I can't hate a real person. And so I think maybe by having you on, you represent a human being that's held on to some spirituality that a lot of atheists just mock.
Yeah.
And yet I'm confronted and confounded by how much I like you and how much I'm like, this is weird because you just seem like a really practical person. And yet, I will say this, if you've been meditating since you were 2, you're probably damn good at it.
It goes in phases, but yeah.
Well, but seriously, I mean,
it means a lot to me, and I like you too, Cass.
but I mean, it is a practice. I don't know. To me, I'm very naive and very uneducated on it. But to me, one of the goals of meditation is to try to relax your mind enough to where there's just a moment of nothingness. Is that fair?
I would say that that's what some traditions think the focus of meditation is. The practice of meditations that I've done in the course of my life have been directive, learning to concentrate, learning to focus on one thing at a time, and also as a way to like plug in to whatever you might call this thing called life, and that energy.
Yeah, in a way that is beyond words.
Yeah.
Well, I will say this about the universe and about, there is a connectivity. There is something going on here that I would like to tap into and connect with. Like I said, I think it's beyond words. Vocabulary, language is all fall very short of explaining. The poet by John Donne, For Whom the Bell Tolls. I just love that. As far as when somebody dies, I'm diminished. And the interconnected web of all things, which is kind of a you quote. Bob and I say it all the time. All right. So in closing, I got a couple of. What do you and your husband do for fun?
We like watching Netflix and going for walks.
So what kind of Netflix binging have you done lately?
Oh gosh, well we're just starting the new House of Cards.
So what episode?
Season.
What episode are you on?
Oh, I can't give any spoilers.
No spoilers. Are you on?
I think we're like 4 in at this point.
I think I am too. We might be in the same place.
Oh, all right.
I love it. I hate it and I love
brilliant.
it.
So brilliant.
I just can't get enough of it. It's so impacting and it makes me, it touches me emotionally and intellectually, gets my wheels spinning. And it just takes me all over the map because sometimes you want to hate the Underwoods and sometimes you want to love them and sometimes you want to, it's amazing writing.
Yeah.
So I concur. What else? Let's see. You said you got any pets?
Oh yes, we have 2 cats. They're both calicos, mother and daughter, Bella and Rue, and you'll see a lot of them in my Facebook feed. Okay. Yeah, absolutely love our kitties.
What about Eckhart Tolle? Where do you like Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah, I've read a few of his books. New Earth and Power of Now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's got a lot of wonderful things to say. Again, I take what works for me and let go of what doesn't. But yeah, I respect him as one of the spiritual, as putting forward his own spirituality in a way that others can understand things differently. Yeah,
and he's impacted my life, and I still have respect for him. Awesome. When I say that, you have to understand that a lot of the atheist community, they just, anybody that's even slightly woo-woo, just have no respect for him. And so there's some circles where if I came out and said, hey, I kind of like Eckhart Tolle, they would just write me off. Yeah.
So how is that different from the Christian fundamentalists?
It's fundamentalist. It's fundamentalist atheism. I agree. Mm-hmm. And I don't like it.
And I know there's always a spectrum.
Yep, for sure. So what about Tara Brach? You ever heard of her?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So that was the one my wife listens to. So
how do you spell that?
Brach.
Cool.
And she stumbled onto her, but I actually enjoy her podcast as well. And there's some guided meditations on there and stuff. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Do you use that phone app for any guided meditations?
No.
Okay. You're just that good at it since you've been doing it since you were 2.
We use an app for a timer, and that's about it.
Oh, okay, yeah. And is it one of those bowls, the dongs?
Yes. I definitely prefer the time or the bowl ring.
Yeah.
As opposed to, an alarm clock kind of
or a
sound.
kitchen timer or something. So I saw this kind of a meme on the wall of a friend's house last night. I'm going to run it by you. It said something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not interested in finding myself. I'm interested in creating myself, or something like that. What do you?
Oh yeah, life isn't about.
Yeah, that's it. Life's not about finding yourself. It's about creating yourself.
Yeah.
What do you feel about that?
I believe that to a certain extent.
Or both and.
Both and, yeah. I feel like there's a lot to find out about oneself, and
and thereby a lot to create from that platform.
I definitely believe in the metaphysical tenet of co-creation, of, by the thoughts you think and choose and activities you choose to engage in, you can create and impact how your world is.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, yes, I do believe in.
We're talking about, or at least I sometimes talk about, when and if I'm going to choose to push back against somebody's religion. And obviously, if it makes them an asshole, I'm probably just going to avoid them. I'm not going to push back. Mm-hmm. But there is some toxicity, I think, to religions that remove agency from a person.
Absolutely.
And you see that...
When you say agency, do you mean like their personal power and their responsibility?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from, this create yourself, type stuff. And just your power to make choices, your freedom to find your path. And, I think obviously within certain sects of Christianity, you have patriarchy where the women aren't allowed to speak in church, or even the male robbery of agency is you are a wretch. There's no good in you. You can't think even a good thought without the Holy Spirit giving it to you. I mean, just a robbery of dignity, of what it means to be human. Mm. And so anytime a religion, no matter what it is, seems to diminish what it means to be human and elevate some other power that you have to cede your own agency to, then red flags fly for me. That's all I'm saying.
I hear you. I wouldn't be part of a community that talked about that either.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm saying is I don't hear that in your voice. I hear the opposite in your story. I think you're celebrating your own agency to be the steward of your own happiness and pursuit.
Yeah. And also from my own past.
Yeah. And taking responsibility and ownership of all of it. I mean,
Yep.
Just saying it is what it is.
Yeah, and it's been so freeing with, going through my own religion of origin healing experience of being able to come to that place. Mm-hmm. Because in between those 6 years, I was stuck in limbo. Like I didn't feel like I could move back or forward. And that was painful. But I don't think I could have the experience and the attitude I have today without going through that healing process.
Yeah. So I'm just going to run by some names again. Like, you ever read a psychologist by the name of David Rico?
No.
Okay. I imagine in spiritual psychology, was it largely Jungian?
There is definitely a basis in Jungian psychology. We also studied a lot of Carl Rogers.
Yeah, he was next, yeah.
And Fritz Perls, Gestalt therapy. Definitely, it comes very much Jung and Carl Rogers as a baseline.
Okay, I'm going to switch to music now as far as name dropping. I'm
terrible with names.
I'm a big fan of Andre Bocelli.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And he's as close as I get to opera, really, I guess. Uh-huh. So you perform there in Kansas City, like on a regular basis, or?
I'm getting there. I'm just about 3 months out from my music agency job, so I'm starting to go out more into the music community and get to know the various options there are. But I sing fairly regularly at various Unity churches around the area.
Uh-huh, yeah.
And hope to get more into musical theater and hopefully collaborate with the UMKC opera program. I do a lot of self-producing, and so I'll probably end up putting together a recital myself. And
yeah, invite your friends.
Yeah,
pop the cork on some wine bottles and have a recital.
Exactly.
So I think most people have a love-hate relationship with karaoke. Where do you land?
I don't go to karaoke.
But I'm saying you're at a bar with friends and they know you're a singer and they start elbowing you and saying, get up there. Are you going to do it?
Yeah, well...
Depends on how many drinks you've had.
I would say it's more like an open mic night.
Yeah.
More than a karaoke that we tend to go to. There's a great open mic night at Unity Village Chapel once a month. And when I actually didn't perform there for the first 7 months we were there, because it was such a wonderful environment where people could get up and, regardless of their musical abilities, just get up and express themselves. And I felt, and also because I didn't want people to just see me as a singer. And that tends to be something where as soon as they hear me sing, they always think of me as a singer.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I'm more of a person than that. Well,
you just moved to town and you got this new beginning. You don't want to necessarily get pigeonholed right off the first.
Exactly. But when I finally did, I prefaced it by saying, I am a professional singer. I wanted to maintain the safe environment of that open mic night because it was just so special. And so, yeah.
One more question. It came to me and I've lost it, but I'm going to get it back.
I'll just throw in really quickly that I am planning to launch an online version of the Religion of Origin Healing Program.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I wanted to make it in a format that would be available to anybody to do it on their own pacing or live, with some interaction with me and confidentially as well.
Yeah. Well, if someone wanted to reach out and talk to you personally about anything that we've discussed today, is that a possibility?
Absolutely.
How would they do so?
They could reach out to me via email. Email is best. It's Cheri at CheriJamison.com. And that's CheriJamison.com.
Cheri Jamison. Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate, I think we heard there at the end that it took a little bit of courage, not just for you to come on this show, but even when you started sharing your story at your Religion of Origin healings, that for so long it was just internal, it's just you and your little secret.
Yep.
And, it's fairly new and recent that you're branching out and talking about it. And so I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for having a space for me to do so.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.
So that's my talk with Cheri Jamison. You can continue this conversation with her about your own Religion of Origin healing by writing Cheri at CheriJamison.com. That's Cheri with a Cheri. I think you'd be in good hands with her. Bob will be back next week, and we'll have a guest by the name of Joshua Hupp, who was in a cult for 10 years in which the pastor's wife would tap certain men of whom God told her that they were lusting after other men's wives. Then she would chastise the other men to beat that guy up. And they would. It's certainly one of the craziest stories we've ever heard on this podcast. Bob calls it the Christian Fight Club. We're going to go out with a song featuring our guest, Cheri Jamison. This is a version of the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, because, we're all going to die.
Abunda bashmayo net kadashmak tiet yemol kutak newet seveyane kai kanad bashmayo fura. Bashmayo net kadashmak tiet yemal kutak newe teveyane kai kanad bashmayo fura. spoken, how